If you're ever alone in the woods and you hear someone call your name, stop. Don't answer. Don't call back. Whatever is out there already knows who you are. That's not comforting. That's the problem. This is the story of a man named Mark, and the last night he ever went hunting alone. He didn't believe in anything that couldn't be explained. By the end of that night, he stopped needing an explanation. He just needed to get inside. Mark was 34, a machinist, the kind of man who kept a spreadsheet of his hunting trips going back a decade. He always hunted with his older brother, Dale, same ridge, same week every November, since they were teenagers. But that year, Dale's daughter got sick 2 days before they were supposed to leave, and Dale canceled. Mark almost canceled too. He didn't. He told himself the trip was already paid for. He told himself he'd done this stretch of forest 100 times. He told himself he wasn't the kind of man who needed his brother there to feel safe in the woods. He packed the truck alone on a Thursday night and told no one exactly which trailhead he was taking. By the time he parked, it was already dark, and the Forest Service road behind him was the last paved thing for 11 miles. The walk-in was familiar enough to be boring. Pine needles underfoot, the smell of cold sap, his own breath the loudest sound in the world. He found the same flat clearing he and Dale always camped at it, half a mile off any trail, tucked between two ridgelines that killed cell signal completely. He built a small fire, more out of habit than need. He ate. He checked his rifle out of habit, not expectation. Nothing about the first 2 hours felt different from any other trip. It was, later, the detail that bothered him most, how ordinary it all was right up until it wasn't. Around 10, he decided to walk the ridge one more time before sleeping, flashlight in one hand, rifle slung over his shoulder. The moon was thin. The forest past the reach of his flashlight beam was just a flat wall of black, the kind of dark that doesn't have a texture, only distance. He was maybe 200 yards from camp when he heard it. A voice calling his name from somewhere off to his left. Mark. Just that. Flat, ordinary, like someone calling him in for dinner. He stopped walking. He told himself it was an echo, his own footsteps, or a bird, or the particular way sound bends round a ridge like this one. He'd heard stranger things in these woods before. Owls that scream like women, elk that bugle like something dying. He stood still for almost a full minute, listening to nothing but his own pulse, and when the woods stayed quiet, he let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, and kept walking. He didn't turn back toward the camp. Not yet. He told himself there was nothing to turn back from. It called again 8 minutes later. Closer this time, close enough that he felt the sound arrive before he consciously registered the word. Mark. He swung the flashlight toward the tree line on his left fast, the beam cutting a narrow cone through fog he hadn't noticed rolling in. Nothing. Just bark and the low scrub between the trunks and his own shadow stretching backward from the light. He held the beam there for a long 10 seconds, watching for any shift in the shapes, any place the dark looked wrong. Nothing moved. He told himself, out loud this time, that sound does strange things in fog, that voices carry and bend and arrive from directions they didn't start in. He said it like a fact. It didn't feel like one. His hand was shaking slightly around the flashlight, and he made himself stop before he noticed it too much. The third time, he almost didn't register it as separate from the first two until halfway through the word, he realized it wasn't just his name. It was the way Dale said his name. The exact rise on the first syllable, the small flat drop at the end, a voice he'd heard call him in from 100 different tree lines over 20 years of hunting trips. His brother wasn't within 200 miles of this ridge. His brother was at a hospital, sitting next to a sick 8-year-old. And something in this forest had his voice anyway, not a passable imitation, not something his ear could second guess. Exact. Mark stood completely still for the first time all night and understood, in a way he couldn't explain to anyone later, that whatever was calling him wasn't confused about who he was. It was being specific on purpose. He started walking back toward camp fast, not running yet, telling himself running was for people who'd actually seen something. He hadn't seen anything. That was almost worse. Halfway there, the voice called again, and this time it came from two places at once. Dale's voice from behind him, and a half second later, the same word, same rise and fall from somewhere ahead of him, between him and camp. That was the moment the walking stopped being a decision. There was no clear space between hearing that and moving. His flashlight beam was jumping with every stride, throwing the trees into strobing pieces, and behind him or beside him, or everywhere, he genuinely couldn't tell anymore. His brother's voice kept saying his name, patient, unhurried, like it had all night. He ran. Not toward the trailhead. He'd lost that direction somewhere in the last 2 minutes, but toward the only fixed point he had left, a hunting cabin 3/4 of a mile off the ridge, and an old line shack he and Dale had never used but always joked about breaking in if the weather turned. He didn't remember deciding to run there. His legs decided for him. Somewhere in the first 100 yards, his rifle sling caught on a low branch and he let it go rather than stop. Heard it hit the ground behind him and didn't look back. Branches tore at his jacket. His flashlight beam swung wild with every stride, catching flashes of bark, fern, black space, bark again. He was breathing too hard to hear if the voice was still calling. He didn't stop to check. The cabin came up out of the dark faster than he expected, a single square shape with one window catching a weak orange glow he hadn't expected, and didn't have time to question. Later, he'd wonder about that light. In the moment, he ran straight for it. The porch boards gave under his weight, uneven and rotten in places, and he hit the door with both hands hard enough to bruise. It opened. He didn't remember it being unlocked. He didn't care. He got inside, slammed it shut behind him, and threw the old iron bolt with hands that weren't entirely steady. For a moment, just a moment, all he could hear was his own breathing, ragged and enormous in the small dark room. Then, 3 soft knocks on the door. Not urgent. Not frantic. Measured, almost polite, the way you'd knock on a neighbor's door, not force one open. And then, quiet, right against the wood, close enough that he felt it more than heard it. Mark. Same voice. Same rise and fall. He didn't answer. He backed away from the door until his shoulders hit the wall, and he stayed there, not moving, not breathing out if he had to, until the morning came through the window and a knocking and a voice had been there for longer than he could remember. He never went back for the rifle. He still doesn't know who lit that porch light. Some nights, when the house is quiet, he still hears someone almost say his name and stops whoever it is before they finish.